Welcome to the third season of That's So Second Millennium, the Catholic Science podcast where we explore the fascinating borderlands between science and theology through realms of philosophy, human experience, and more. Welcome back to episode 108 of That's So Second Millennium. So this is a conversation between Bill and I where we started out talking about masks and the science behind masks and the difficulties people have with masks. And because this is That's So Second Millennium, eventually we start talking about the difference between ancient and medieval culture and modern culture. We do so by means of talking about science, the quest for novelty in science, the quest for novelty across cultures, the difficulties conservatism has because novelty is such a drive in contemporary society. We talk about modern wealth and our modern anxiety, which is sort of strange since it seems so out of character, but of course there are many reasons why we feel so anxious, why anxiety seems to be increasing, and how we can afford this quest for novelty because we just have so much social capital built up. We have so much material wealth and security that we can afford to spend so much time looking for novelty. We'll see if it catches up with us in the next several decades. All right. I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be a long hiatus because August has 5 Mondays this year, so we will get back on September 14th. Thanks a lot. In a way, that is a point of departure for this one in terms of if we want to start talking about, the whole mask fiasco and the sort of cultural, the way that plays into cultural norms and our, polarized political debate.
I think that is a legitimate thing to talk about. I respect the science as I understand it in a limited way. I respect the science behind the use of masks, but then it's of course complicated by all sorts of other things, as is every aspect of our politics and culture and society and media. Now it's complicated by how you feel about Trump and how you feel about Biden, and whether you think that the order to, or the proposed order to mandate masks for everybody nationwide when outside, whether or not they're near people, one wonders where the solidarity with society and solidarity with good science stops, and where the kind of mindless, leader follower mind frame that really only feeds into unhealthy social and political trends starts. Is that how you feel?
I certainly wouldn't express it in quite so many terms. I mean, I look at what's the debate about masks specifically, and on the one side, I get that the recommendations changed. I'm not surprised, nor is my confidence in the scientific enterprise shaken by it. I mean, it was already. It's like asking me if it bothers me that Alexander VI or whoever was a terrible pope. It doesn't. I've already digested that. I've already taken that into account.
Right.
The fact that it's hard, and we talked the last time we had a one-on-one conversation. We were talking about statistics and the difficulty that we have in science with our use of statistics, because statistics is awfully subtle and it seldom tells us exactly what we want. It's like the whole question of what does a p-value tell you? It tells you the likelihood of your data given your hypothesis, but what you really want is the likelihood of your hypothesis given your data, and that's not possible. I mean, that's simply not possible. We just can't do that, and we have a hard time tangling with the intellectual, consequences of that. And then so the fact that early on. We ought to know more. I mean, this is another interesting question. How does science, how is the work directed? So it's directed almost it's not a free market but it has similarities to that. It's what individual people go and choose what they study, and they choose an individual take on an individual problem, and then they try to convince people to give them grant money to study that problem. They try to convince people to publish the results that they get. It's very individualistic. I mean, it always has been. And, there's never been even in, say, the Soviet Union, even in China, at the depths of Maoism, I don't think anyone has ever attempted to sort of direct science that rigidly. I mean, there's certainly, to an extent, there's been some bureaucratization, but it's still directives being sort of put out there, and then individuals decide how they're going to try to sell their research as fitting in with that directive. So it's very, and it leaves gaps. It leaves things that, like, you stand here in 2020 and you turn around and look back. It's like, why didn't we look at that problem? Doesn't that seem obvious? Shouldn't we already know whether a face mask, helps stop the transmission of, because it's not like the coronavirus is unique. I mean, in terms of its transmission method, that's not.
No, that's right.
I don't think anyone's really made that claim. I mean, there are subtleties about it, but I don't think we actually know as much as we'd like to about how the common cold or the flu. Like, gosh, how long has it been since I've heard the term the common cold? Even
it's kind of been overwhelmed in the public discussion.
We talk about influenza a lot because that's our comp, but we don't talk about the common cold much these days. It's like it seems like we should know. It seems like that's, and I certainly, in my perspective as a geologist and someone who's interested in material science, there's a lot of sort of basic. Why don't we already know the thermal expansion of this extremely common mineral to a lot more specificity than we do? People got bored, and that's
interesting.
The state of science is what we do and don't know is to a large extent determined by what interested people and what bored them. What just got left behind, like Napoleon leaving his army to surround this fortress while he goes off into Austria and continues to wreak havoc, and stuff gets left behind because it's boring, because it's too that's not groundbreaking. This is a social pressure inside science. This is just pedestrian, ordinary science. This is just incremental science. Blah 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 blah, and I think it's something. The quest for novelty has taken us so far, and we've gone so far over to that side of. If you look at the historical sweep of the last several centuries, again, this is after all that's so second millennium. So how did the last 500? How does this fit into the trend of the last 500 years? The second half of the second millennium. I think there's been this shift way too far over to one side of a golden mean. There is a golden mean between conformism and seeking after novelty. You can be way too conformist, and then there are still pockets of conformity. But we're so caught up in the search for novelty. So much of society is our economics is based so much on looking for the next disruptive thing.
Yeah.
Right? What's the next thing that's going to disrupt everything? I mean, that's just such a vaunted term. And novelty. In science, what is the new groundbreaking or the term revolutionary, which is so overused that it started to recede a little bit, I think, in terms of usage. But the concept is still there. We're looking for the next revolutionary thing. So that will tell us that everything we already know is wrong. We're just hungry for that. We're looking for that everywhere.
That's got to be new and implicitly self-destructive to some degree. It seems to me that what was always valued about novelty and innovation and curiosity and wanting to learn more was not identified with deconstruction and really destructive questioning of the status quo, but rather how can we improve and how can we build upon the good parts of the status quo. It's almost as if innovation and curiosity and novelty have been redefined at their very roots in recent years. No?
Yeah, that's really meta. That's a really meta form of evolutionary novelty disruption. Yeah, and our society is breaking down around it, I think, to some extent. I think to a considerable extent, and it hasn't all the way caught up with us yet, but yeah. People, you look at everything to do with the family, right? And that's what that's our future. And it takes a while for that to, for us to see the effects of what we're doing. You think about, obviously it goes back at least as far as the 60s, and then there's legalized abortion. And then now we have, everything to do with, gay marriage. That almost can be overstated. It's like that becomes such a banner and it gets shoved in our face that we're not, really looking at what the bulk of people are doing, because the bulk of people are still not involved in that.
Right.
It's what's going to continue happening as that trend continues to work its way through our social system, through our population, through our society.
Well, no one is capable of, or no one seems interested in looking at the long-term implications or the long-term trajectories of any of these things. Everybody's necessarily, if we're totally concentrated on what's new today and what can we do that's innovative and creative today, then there's really no room for either yesterday or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
The guarantee is that tomorrow is going to be something that, we're just going to rip up today and go off in some other direction almost at random.
Yeah, I don't know. That's an interesting point. Yeah, people. Usually the defense for progress is that it is going to make tomorrow better in some sense that's going to be worth keeping, and that's going to bring us towards some more perfect, lasting ideal. But actually, the way we think about the present is our best clue as to how we're going to look at the future. Why? So it's your question. Why should we look toward a better tomorrow if our attitude then is going to be deconstructionist and disruption oriented then too? We just keep building something new and fully expecting to tear it down in the short-term future, which really is a nihilism, which really is a kind of masochism and sadism combined.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Am I right?
On myself and others. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's.
And of course, it's part of human nature. For instance, I think of having grown up in New York. Oh yeah, it's the ongoing story of Manhattan, that you see buildings being built up, a lot of money and effort being expended on some construction project, but fully knowing that right down the block there's a really nice building that's being torn down, and that in 10 years, probably this building that's going up now will also be coming down for some better,
or at least it'll be gutted project. And renovated, and then
exactly
10 years after that.
Exactly, and we've gotten used to that kind of mind frame in so much and yet that's what the conservative frame of mind is supposed to prevent, right? We're supposed to the degree that conservatism has any appeal to young people, and I think conservatism has to work harder on building its appeal to young people. But at the very least, young people should feel, well, they grew up in circumstances that had certain good qualities, and they should be thankful for that and be able to pinpoint those good qualities, and then also say, well, I want those good qualities to persist, and I'm willing to take stands that will help those to persist, even though they may not seem at the moment like the best shortcut to that extra piece of progress and change that I envision down the road. Maybe we want progress and change so quickly that we think even conserving some of the beautiful things that have brought us to where we are today, we just can't afford that luxury.
Right. So much political culture is fixated on the fact that, well, by God, American society is racist and sexist and homophobic, and therefore, therefore it must all be torn down. We've been going around this block for a while. We've been circling this block at least since the 60s in that fairly radical form. Of course, before that it was Marxism, and Marxism wants to tear everything down in a different way.
Yes.
So really, it's just translating it from economy to, other aspects of society. So that's been going around for. None of these things are new. And the idea of, totally ripping up society, it's just that people in the ancient and medieval world just couldn't entertain that luxury for all that long, because they really were at the edge of survival. They really were, if they threw up everything they were already doing and tried something new, they had so little social capital to burn through before it caught up with them that they were, not doing something. So it was incremental improvements were just the only way to go. It was, people were going to continue doing, the agricultural and trade practices and, landowning practices and all of that stuff that they had. And stuff, would get changed, but they would get changed at a fairly superficial level. The level of, whether the Romans are in charge instead of the Seleucids or something like that. The people at the top would change, but the peasantry would keep doing more or less the same thing that they're doing. Now everyone is engaged in, and it's just because we have enough social capital built up. The post-World War II world just has unthinkable wealth and unthinkable material, success, so that we have all of this space to revel in. And we can entertain this, and the people who are, engaged in society, economically, doing something successful. And of course, it can be spread across the world now. So we don't have to make anything in the United States. We hardly have to make any material goods in the United States at all. We can have so few people involved in growing food because, we have so much mechanization of agriculture and all of that sort of thing. But the rest of us can sort of flail around and do things that aren't really, that aren't geared toward survival, or even, toward sort of ordinary material comfort or, plenty. And we have so much room to sort of engage in this sort of experiment, but there's still going to be limits. There still are limits in terms of, how much our happiness has eroded, in terms of, we're less safe than we were. We're safer than we were materially, and yet it's hard to argue that we're happier in terms of our, levels of anxiety, or our levels of, that you can quantify these things at all easily. If we all took blood tests of like how much of different neurotransmitters we had in our blood system, I suppose, in our circulatory system, I suppose that would begin to give you some indication. But yeah, it's it's still hard to, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how contrary this is. And yeah, you're what you're saying about gratitude, I mean, that's just absolutely anathema to so many people, and people that I even, talk to in the context of, say, recovery,
Right.
people trying to recover from, diseases that ultimately go back to mental diseases, essentially, that go back to, worrying all the time, that go back to not feeling safe, and to all the stuff that Darshan Narvez talks about,
Right.
the lack of security, and, and it's, and they're just not able, or to some degree not willing, to hear like that there's anything to be grateful for at all. It's just, that's not thinkable, and that's disrespecting the pain that I've been through. And they've been through pain. I mean, unthinkable.
Yeah.
Well, it is thinkable, but it's, it's tremendous pain, and that's a bridge you have to cross somehow to get to, a life that's really, worth living, as Fulton Sheen would say.
Well, people haven't really been taught about those the need for those bridges, and I guess they've come to see so much of the future as urgently problematic that they are willing to more quickly and more readily dispose of a lot of the stuff from the past without any philosophically grounded or pragmatically grounded transition time or transition space where, let's press pause, as it were, and let's think about all of this together before we make any rash judgments. One of the things that I like about, many Chesterton quotes, I think he said, never, when you come to the end of a road and you see the sign, no trespassing, don't go beyond this point. At least please be sure why people put that sign up before you tear it down so you can continue the road.
Right. Yeah.
At least, and we don't even think of why that sign was
right. Yeah.
put up anymore.
We're certain that it was there because of bigotry or something, some other sort of thing. That there's, some, the idea that marriage is, basically about having kids, and that there's some value in being, a virgin before you get married. Obviously those are just there for some bad reason, and we don't even need to think about what those were. It's just bad crap that we've inherited from centuries gone by, and we just need to throw it away as quickly as possible.
And our media and our politicians feed that short-sightedness and feed that negativity toward the past, because like we were saying, everything in our culture, everything in our economy is built to favor the new, the innovative, the bigger, the better, the assumption that progress is going to be better. And there's no one really coaching us to press pause. There's no one coaching us to stop and think. That one would think that role would have been played at one point by the universities, because you have all of these different fields of built-up knowledge that you would think have an inherent stake in preserving that knowledge,
Yeah, I mean, you think about where universities started, right? They started in the High Middle Ages, and what did they have? They had the Masters of Arts who studied philosophy, and they had the Masters of Theology
to study what we had already gained as a human race.
Yeah, that there was this, that there was this core of knowledge that we already had, and that we had to preserve at almost all costs.
Right.
We had to preserve Scripture, and we had to preserve the dogmas of the church. We had to preserve these authoritative, clarifications, basically, that the councils gave of, matters like the Trinity and the Incarnation. We had to cling to those, and then the implicit assumption was also that the ancients had already, the ancient Greeks, essentially in particular, had already given us, a lot of valuable knowledge and philosophy, and that we were going to build with these tools, that we had these, we had these foundations laid, and we had these principles with which we could work, and we were going to use those to build something, and then we're still going to make progress. And in that era, progress was probably downplayed more than it needed to be. And that was what universities, I mean, they were gatherings of, what we already had. The whole universe of what we already had could be reflected there. And then and then they've become these bastions of, it's weird. I mean, of course, they're huge institutions with all the implicit conservatism in a certain sense that huge institutions have. And yet they're also, places where there's so much, like I was talking about, so much spare resources floating around, that people can just drift off into, because the price for drifting and saying something that's simply not true, not useful, is so low.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkart. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.